Thank you, and Professor Tomiura, for giving me this great opportunity. And so my name is Kazuyuki IMAZATO, Director of Human Resource Policy Division of Ministry of Economic Industry. I'd also like to thank Professor BALDWIN for the very thought-provoking presentation. And so so nowadays, discussion on the GenAI have often mainly focusing on the negative aspect, and such as the possibility of the job loss or social unrest, and as much as on the excellence of the technology and its potential for the industrial applications. But against this backdrop, I think today's the presentations is very significant to analyze the possibility that GenAI can increase productivity, and at the same time, especially among the low-skilled workers, and help reduce global inequality. And so I'd like to make some comment on today's presentations. The first, and so I'd like to discuss the future evolution of GenAI technology and its potential applications. And so here is a summary of the impact of automation on the U.S. labor market over the past 30 years. And so the next page, it also shows that impact on the Japanese labor market. So actually, today, the Professor BALDWIN elaborates about how generative AI is only a support for the humans, and then also has a limited impact on the disrupting industries, especially in the service sector. And then so, however, still, I think it is necessary to discuss and so what the difference between the Gen AI and the conventional automation technologies is an essential sense. And so as technology continues to develop at an ever-increasing pace, it is necessary to debate whether the role of GenAI is remain limited to support, or whether it could lead to complete automation of the service processes. And so, for example, with almost no need for the processing, editing, or proofwriting, or something like that. And so we also need to discuss the synergetic and the effect of the other technologies, such as the effect of the combining generative AI and robotics, as well as the Gen AI developed itself. And so, but at the same time, however, it should now be noted that at least for Japan, so these technological advances are not necessarily a threat to the society, but rather the welcome opportunities. And so as Japan faces a full-fledged population decline, further advances in the automation technology will play an extremely important role in the resolving social the issues. And the next, so sorry for this is just the busy slide, but actually, so I'd also like to comment on the international rule-making necessities to maximize the possibility of eliminating the international inequality through expanding GenAI. So discussion on the international regulatory framework for the GenAI are currently underway. So as indicated here, the last year, the EU passed the AI Act that included GenAI regulations. So while Professor BALDWIN's argument and certainly means that the potential for the remote work in developing countries will increase, but at the same time, it also means that the demand for the remote work in the developed country will decrease. So given that the situation, it might stir up social unrest in developed countries and lead to the introduction of the more stronger regulations. In order to maximize the positive effect of the GenAI, I believe it is important to establish internationally harmonized regulatory frameworks and to work on the capacity building in both developed and less developing countries. And so in conclusion, I'd like to once again pay sincere tribute to Professor BALDWIN for this very excellent research result. And I hope that you will continue this research and the global discussion in this field. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. IMAZATO. His comment can be divided into broadly two parts. The first one is about the technology and how the new AI is different from the old-style automation, and how the AI is related with other technologies. So Professor Baldwin, could you respond to the first part of his comment?
I'm sorry, I spaced out when you said what.
Yeah, his comment is about the technological aspect, and the second one is about the regulatory framework and the international rule.
Okay.
So the first part.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the slides you show are the impact of ICT. These are, you can see the sites are, and ICT, this is the classic hollowing out. So I guess this is employment. And so the middle skilled professions saw a reduction. The lowest skilled, like street sweepers and things, they actually had more. And then the highest end, so this looks like this. I don't think it's going to look at all like that in GenAI. So for one thing, GenAI doesn't really affect a huge number of those people. They don't generate content. So unless you're a content generator, it just doesn't really affect you. So there's some types of new GenAI where they're training robots more efficiently to do things. So that may also have some impact, but I didn't talk about those today. And also, automation in those jobs has been going on forever, so it'd probably be more incremental than radical. Whereas automation's never really happened in the offices. So I think it's going to be much flatter. And I think basically the middle, let's say low skill won't be affected at all. Middle skills will be more popular, more employment, and high skills maybe no change or maybe even less. So let me give you an example. AI has been used quite extensively in legal law firms, and that's been going on for quite a while. So the law firms, a lot of what they do is read stuff and summarize it and documents. And so even maybe 20 years ago, they started doing e-discovery, which where they would just feed all the documents and emails into a computer that would then, create more or less a Google that you could search. And they would discover, when did Mr. X first talk to Mr. Y about this merger, for example. And so they were using electronics. And that started to reduce the number of young lawyers who read these documents, but it increased the number of technically capable people who don't have law degrees but know something about law. So it's flattened the scale in law firms. And I think it'll be a lot more like that. So the middle skilled people who are getting the training of the best, but through an app, they're the ones who are going to become more employable, more productive. So I think it'll look very, very different than that. So then on the regulation, so the EU, clearly this is something that's new. Clearly it's something that has incredibly large implications for our society. And therefore it should be regulated in the sense of, it's not like, let's see what happens and we'll catch up afterwards, which tends to be, in the industry, that's move fast and break things. That's their idea. But this kind of technology, I think, could be very disruptive to socioeconomic structures and stuff. So I agree with the Europeans that it should be regulated. I'm not an expert on AI regulation, but when I looked at it, it seemed pretty reasonable. And I know some people in the industry think Europe is never going to catch up to the US because of this regulation. But on the other hand, European consumers will be protected from some of the worst aspects of this. From what I understand, Siri in the United States is smart now, where Siri in Europe is pretty dumb. And it just doesn't understand anything. Compared to, you're so used to ChatGPT and all those where they get it right away, even if you misspell it. Where apparently in the United States, she started talking. She heard her name, so okay, we gotta hide that in my jacket. But anyway, so in U.S. apparently they're putting that AI on, but at the same time gathering data as people talk to it, and that's not allowed in Europe. So they haven't brought it out in Europe. So okay, maybe Apple's going to be advancing in the U.S. Maybe the research are there, but it's also about protection. And ultimately, this is my personal opinion: is that how many people are going to have jobs in AI R&D? How many people are actually going to be employed by people like OpenAI, things like this much? But everybody's a consumer. And these are to protect the consumers, not to promote the production. So even if all the rest of the AI researchers move from London to California, it won't really bother the European economy, in my view. These guys are not generating huge amounts of spillovers like industrial production or medical research would lead to bigger spillovers. This is a very narrow thing. So that's I think it's a good idea. And I don't have a very, very specific idea as to whether it's too much or too little. I'm very happy it was, and it struck me as reasonable.
Okay.
Does Japan have one, by the way? AI laws?
And it's actually the introducing the regulation of the AI technology is currently under discussion.
Under discussion?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good.
Okay. We will now move on to the question and answer session. I like to take some from the questions from the audience. One is somewhat related to the discussion about the displacement of job creation, the destruction thing. The audience asked that some of the generative AI may replace low-skilled workers. The audience cites an example. That the artificial actor replaced the real actor. Famous actor can survive, but others may lose job. How could you respond to this kind of question?
Sure. So this is an example where I think it's true that there is a lot of voiceovers and that will be replaced. But I'm talking in general. So I think the number of situations where GenAI can actually replace the human is relatively limited, because normally you have to have humans doing it. And by the way, when they have an AI doing voiceover, there's a huge team of humans making sure it says the right thing in the right tone of voice. So it's not like they just put the AI in a room with a camera and say, make a commercial. So it's also creating jobs. But the people in front of the camera, that's right. But you could also say that was true of movies, where before every performance had to be on a stage live, and so you need more people to do it. Now it's in a movie. So there is changes like that. So I'm not saying every single job will be protected. But I think if you think hard about which ones are replaceable and which aren't, most of especially the Gen AI that I'm talking about, is involved in content creation. And then the humans must still be there. And my ultimate argument was that it's going to lead to higher demands for quality, not fewer people, and not more output. So that's how I essentially respond by restating.
Okay, and another question is the relationship with the globalization, especially your expression, the second wave of globalization. You said that breaking down the language barrier, then that it may be we should think that that change will make the world even flatter, as predicted in the world is flat. Or let me add a phrase from your own book, that the great convergence, that global integration of China into the world trading system, coupled with the introduction of the internet, result in a flatter world. But now that generative AI, what do you think of the relationship with the globalization and that current change?
Thank you. So just first of all, to get my terminology right here, the first wave of globalization was goods crossing borders. The second, which my great convergence was all about, was factories crossing borders. This is a third wave. This is a third transformation of globalization, and it's offices crossing borders. So I think it's just to get that right. Now, the other thing is that the world's never going to be flat. That this, if you look at how, especially large economies are relatively closed, and mostly people are their own best customers, and I don't think that's going to change. What I'm talking about is marginal movements up or down. And so that I don't think it will be the world flat. I think we're going a long way from that. And if you want, how I would argue that is what happened during COVID. So when COVID hit, lots of people started working from home for some things, but not everybody and not for everything. And now that COVID's over, some people are coming back to the office, some not, sometimes some days per week, and So that's what this is going to do. International telework will increase the trade and will increase the integration, but it won't get rid of the normal services, jobs. Some things require face-to-face. Some things are just easier to coordinate a team if the team can talk to each other face-to-face once a week or every day. And so I don't think we're going to a flat world by any means. It's really just a marginal change. So that's the third transformation will lead to higher integration, but nowhere near flat.
Okay. Next, I'd like to take the related question. You know that we are living in a world that is not at all flat. And in your presentation, you referred to the possibility of generative AI reduce the cultural difference by citing the example of simultaneous speech translation. Could you explain that story?
Sure, yeah. That's a great question. I didn't have time for the slides, but I'll do that. So actually, 2 weeks ago, I wrote a little piece in the New York Times explaining this idea, and I led with this. So the anecdote I used there, and I'm going to use it again, is I was giving a lecture at IMD to some executives about this sort of stuff. And I always like to start with gee whiz stuff, because people who haven't used this are often astounded when they see it. And this was an alumni group, so I was hoping not all of them had tried it yet. So what I did was I asked ChatGPT to write a 2-minute speech to welcome new workers to the company. Out it comes. And then I asked Word to read it aloud. Then I read it aloud. And one of the participants says, you know, that speech sounds like an American gave it. Did it actually understand your accent? Because I did chatty verbally. And so I thought, I had never thought of that. So then I asked it to rewrite the same speech for a South African audience, a British audience. I even had it do, with the skeptical woman in the audience was Finnish. So I had it do it in Finnish. She was not pleased with the translation at all. But in any case, most of the people thought, okay, this is a speech that's culturally appropriate. So this thing is trained on an enormous database. It doesn't know anything about culture or language. But if you queue it up to say, do it acting like a general manager in a British company, it automatically generates things that have a British tone to them. So I think a lot of, at least on content creation, you're adapting the output to cultural narratives or what, you know, how you structure things, whether you can tell a joke or not, or whether you should be serious or, you know, you apologize to begin or not, whatever. So it does that automatically. And I think it will allow teleworkers, let's say Indian call sector workers, to be more culturally appropriate than they are now. And especially with the speech translation, they'll be able to, you know, translate it into your local language. So that's what I mean, is it's essentially transforming content to local appropriateness, and GenAI does that. That hasn't been used that much, but it really is very good if you try it out.
Okay, I feel sorry for the Japanese accent of my English.
Well, just wait, you know.
Okay, next question.
Remember Star Trek? You know, they had the universal translator.
Yes, sir.
You know, that's what we'll all have, but we won't have to hold it in our hands. It'll be like this.
Okay. Okay. Next question is somewhat related. That the audience asked that now the AI becomes widespread. What kind of education will be required in the primary, secondary, and higher education?
So I don't think it changes much. So my vision, at least for the next 5 years, is that what's being done in the offices doesn't change very much. It's just you dial up and provide it to somebody overseas, potentially because you have an advantage or new customers, or maybe you're cheaper and they want to hire you for that. So I think it won't change that much. And one of the many slides I didn't include is the basic thing that drives machine learning is data. And if there is no data on it, it can't do it. So it is systematically good at things we already do, but not very good at things we might do. So what this will do is help us do what we already do, but either faster or higher quality, and certainly easier to export it. So I don't see some huge transformation as where things are going on. Now, I know that that's a lot of times that people are thinking about AI, it's going to completely change everything. We can spend all day in bed and we just let the AI do everything. You see, I don't think of that. I think it augments workers, not automate work. And as a consequence, I don't think it'll change what we do very much. We'll just do it better. So it was exactly like, landlines. We used to have telephones with dials like this, and you did coordinate, you aligned with people with that. And now we just do a lot more of it, but more or less the same thing. So this is a transformative in a process, not innovation of product, new things. So typically, I think it's more or less the same. Of course, there's a minimum level of digital fluency that's needed, but almost all the young people get that anyways, just from their phones and the coding and things like that. So that's why I think it's interesting. It's not as transformative as you might think. Now, yeah, so not as a, when I wrote my 2019 book, the big question was, how should we educate our kids? And I said, well, you should try and do things that AI can't do, don't compete with. And that's still true of AI. But with GenAI, since it's an assistant to workers, not a replacement to workers, I don't think it's a threat. Well, except that, now let me see. I was teaching at Gakuin University yesterday, and I gave a lecture in the afternoon. And I told them, I have interactive things where they're supposed to, guess when this happened. And I said, go ahead, use ChatGPT. And sometimes professors say you shouldn't use it. But I think we have to teach them to use it, because GenAI won't take your job, but somebody using GenAI might. So our training in university from high school on should be helping people use this to generate higher quality services more reliably and faster. So we should, just like with, you and I spent huge amount of times on handwriting and mental arithmetic. And now it's all like this. I still have good handwriting, which I'm very pleased about, but nobody cares. Nobody sees it except me. And also the same with the calculation. So I think we have to change that we embrace GenAI and use it to help them do what they need to do.
Okay, in your answer, you refer to the digital fluency. One question from the audience asked about the digital gap or disparity in digital literacy. What do you think of the impact of digital divide on the potential use of AI for offshoring?
Well, so I think that in the old AI, I think that was more of an issue. So to use the old AI, it helped to be able to program and things like that. But the interesting thing about GenAI is how easy it is to use. Like, did you read instruction manuals on ChatGPT? No, you just went on, started asking questions. And same with the natural language processing. You don't need an instruction manual. All of a sudden, your phone does stuff that it didn't do before, and you talk to it and does stuff. Like my mother-in-law was 89 years old. She's using AI on her phone without knowing she's using AI on her phone. So that's totally different than the ICT, where you actually needed to have a university degree to make it work. This one is super easy to use. And you can write poetry. Anybody can write poetry. It's not always beautiful, but you don't need a special skill to use this, because it is this natural language processing. So I think the digital gap is actually narrowed in this domain, GenAI. Now, if you're talking about the digital gap with Africa not having electricity and internet connections, that's going to make it worse. But inside advanced economies, most everybody has steady electricity, a device, an internet connection. So I think it will narrow that part of it. And in particular, the age gap, because it's, the old days it was like I'd have to ask my son, how do I do this on my phone? And then they would like this. Now I just ask Siri how to do it, and then I follow the instructions. So, not Siri, but Chatty.
Okay, and last question. I'd like to ask the opinion as an authority in international economics. You said that the generative AI function as a great equalizer, and you know that and historic change in a global trade. Now we face a serious rivalry between U.S. and China, and the global trade seems to be divided into blocks. How your argument affected by this historic change in global trade?
Sure. Okay. So, interesting thing about geopolitics, it's almost all about manufacturing. All the fights, specifically, almost always about Chinese manufacturing. Whether it comes from China or it's made in Mexico, it's always about manufacturing, mostly cars and stuff like that, and about China. You don't hear people complaining about back office jobs being offshored to here or there. So far, there's been no backlash, no high-level political traction in being against trade and services. For whatever reason, I think the geopolitics doesn't apply to this, which is one more reason why it's likely to dominate. As the world of manufacturing, let's say cars, becomes cartelized, which may very well happen, that won't happen in back office services. So that's why I think it's actually an accelerator, the holding back trade in goods, especially manufacturers, but not trade in services.
Okay, now it's time to close the webinar. Thank you very much, Professor Baldwin. Thank you very much for your participation in our BBL webinar today. Thank you.